Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's JPR, and welcome back to another video. No, we are not talking about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet yet. What, you thought I had a review copy? No, I'm just a regular guy. So today, we're discussing Pokemon abilities, specifically the very worst ones. Originally, I wanted this to be a best and worst video, but A, that would be like a 30-minute long video, and B, I have a feeling that a lot of the best abilities are probably getting nerfed very soon. Like tomorrow. So I'm sure that we'll come back to those after the game releases, but for now, enjoy. But before that, a word from the sponsor of today's video, Stumble Guys. A free-to-play multiplayer game where you run, jump, and stumble through various courses against 31 other competitors. Not only is this a super fun game to take on the go, it's also remarkably simple. Within my first couple tries, I was already making it to the final round, and if I can do that in less than 5 minutes, so can you. The matchmaking process is quick and snappy. Unlike a lot of mobile games, it doesn't restrict how much you can play, and with the wide variety of different courses it has, the fun is endless. You can even customize your Stumble Guy to stand out from the rest of the crowd. And with a big tournament coming up, tons of new skins are being added to the game so that you can rep your favorite football team. New footsteps and soccer-themed emotes are also being added very soon for an extra layer of customization. You can try it out for yourself by downloading it using my link in the description down below. And you never know, you might even find me out there. Thank you, Stumble Guys, for sponsoring. Let's get back to the video. Let's start off pretty light though. Gen 3 being the gen that introduced abilities gave us a lot of them that were just, well, kinda mediocre. And Early Bird is a quintessential example of just how underwhelming some of these abilities really are. Early Bird will half the amount of time that your Pokemon spends asleep, which on paper doesn't sound all that bad until you realize that both Insomnia and Vital Spirit were introduced in this gen as well. Which most of the time are just better since Pokemon with those abilities can't be put to sleep at all. Early Bird is only useful if you want to run rest in your Pokemon, in which case they'll wake up in only one turn instead of two, but pretty much every Pokemon that has Early Bird is so frail that rest isn't really a viable option for them. Kinda like how rest won't be viable for me when these new games come out. Not to mention, they all have strictly better abilities, aside from maybe Dodrio. Tangled Feet's not that good either. Kangaskhan, it has Scrappy. Xatu, Magic Bounce. Houndoom, Flash Fire. Sunflora? Well, actually, just don't use Sunflora, but if you have to, run Chlorophyll. Maybe if this ability was on something like Snorlax, it would actually be somewhat useful, but it's been 20 years and it still has no decent usage. On that same note, Magma Armor is a pretty poor ability itself. It simply prevents the user from being frozen. But if the thought of being frozen scares you, you should really be worried about something more realistic, like Bigfoot. Honestly, it's only really good for the bonus effect where your eggs will hatch faster, but Flame Body does the same thing, and it's available on far more Pokemon who are just strictly better than Magcargo or Camerupt. Rivalry is a Gen 4 ability that feels like a Gen 3 ability. It will raise the user's attack stat by 25% when you're facing a Pokemon of the same gender, but it will lower your attack by 25% if the opponent is the opposite gender. Point is, this is an ability you literally can't control. If it was just the 25% buff, it would be a fine middle-of-the-road ability, but the debuff makes it terribly unreliable. Limber is another example of an ability that is almost completely outclassed on every Pokemon that gets it. Limber prevents you from becoming paralyzed, which again, in theory, doesn't sound so bad, but it's just kinda situational. Ditto has Imposter, so you may as well run that instead. Liepard has Prankster, which is certainly one of the better abilities out there. Stunfisk has this ability for some reason, despite the fact that since Gen 6, Stunfisk can't even be paralyzed due to the fact that it's both electric and ground type. This is even more useless than Levitate on Rotom Fan. Toxapex is certainly never using this ability since Merciless and Regenerator are just worlds better. The only Pokemon that would realistically want Limber is Lopunny, another Pokemon that you probably shouldn't be using since it's not great. And even then, you're pretty much forced to run Limber on this thing since Cute Charm is banned in competitive singles, and its other ability, Klutz, is definitely one of the worst abilities out there. Oh yeah, we've just scratched the surface of terrible abilities, because Klutz is way worse. It's an ability that prevents you from using any held items, which is only useful if you're holding something like a Flame Orb that you're wanting to trick or switcheroo onto your opponent, which only applies to Lopunny, Swoobat, or Golurk. But honestly, they all have way better strategies you can use. Like my personal favorite Lopunny strategy. Don't use it. Aside from the fact that this ability is just downright terrible, every Pokemon that has it just has access to another ability that's miles better. Leaf Guard sorta falls in that same category too. There aren't really any Pokemon that would realistically run this ability over a better one they already have. For starters, it's an ability that requires Sun to be set up, and the payoff isn't the best as it only blocks statuses. A lot of the Pokemon who have this ability also have Chlorophyll, which 9 times out of 10 is just the better of the two. It's not so much bad as it is underwhelming, but still one I wouldn't recommend. On that same note, Oblivious. It used to only block Infatuation, and it was later buffed in Gen 6 to block Taunt as well. It's simply too situational, and since Attract is banned in competitive singles, you won't ever see it there. Next is Steadfast, which is basically just the worst version of Inner Focus. Steadfast will raise the user's speed when they flinch. Most of this ability's users are just way too slow to where +1 speed is barely helping them. And honestly, it would just be better off to not flinch at all. Speaking of worse versions of pre-existing abilities, Big Pex definitely warrants a mention, as it only prevents the user's defense from being lowered, even when we already had abilities like Clear Body and White Smoke which prevented all of your stats from being lowered. And of course, they just slapped this on every early game bird, making them worse than they actually need to be. Pidgeot did not deserve this as a hidden ability. Pickpocket and its later introduced clone Magician aren't particularly amazing abilities either. Both steal items from the opponent, but only if you yourself aren't holding one, which in any competitive format, singles or doubles, just isn't happening. So this ability really only applies to the main story, but even then, it's really only useful for stealing items off of wild Pokemon since the vast majority of trainers never even hold items. To think Magician was the important new hidden ability they gave to Delphox in Gen 6 while Greninja ended up getting Protean is just depressing. Alright, let's talk about a Hoenn Ghost-type Pokemon with a signature ability that is absolutely insane. Sableye with its signature ability Stall, which basically suppresses its own speed stat, making it move last every turn. Sableye is already an aggressively mediocre Pokemon with a poor speed stat of 50, so I don't really understand the point of this ability at all. Maybe it's so that it can take advantage of moves like Payback or Punishment, but really Sableye is the only one getting punished here. I find it even funnier that in Gen 5, Sableye was gifted with Prankster though, which is pretty much the opposite of Stall, giving priority to all status moves. If you want priority in getting great Pokemon videos in Gen 9 though, then be sure to hit the subscribe button. We're less than 25k away from the big 200,000 milestone, so if you're enjoying the video, drop me a sub, I'd really appreciate it. Hoenn, we're not done yet though, because the former signature abilities of Plusle and Minun, Plus and Minus, are absolutely awful. In Gens 3 and 4, if you paired a Pokemon with Plus with a Pokemon with Minus in a double battle, it would raise both Pokemon's special attack by 50%. So yeah, you had to use Plusle and Minun at the same time. Did we not just crown these guys as the worst electric types a couple weeks ago? Even though these abilities were given to a few more Pokemon starting in Gen 5, and the effect was buffed to where Plus can work with Plus and Minus can work with Minus, it's still never going to be worth it. Because every Pokemon with these two abilities is weak to Earthquake. Guess what move is really common in doubles? Yeah, this isn't working, don't even try it. Speaking of underwhelming duos, these are far from the worst abilities in this list, but they're certainly not great. Light Metal and Heavy Metal. They basically do exactly what you think they do. They just change the weight of the Pokemon to be lighter or heavier. Sure, if you run Heavy Slam with Heavy Metal, maybe you'll get something out of it, and if you have Light Metal, I don't know, you won't get low kicked as hard. Regardless, weight is probably one of the least significant mechanics in Pokemon, so it hardly justifies losing an ability slot for one of these. Or if you're Duraludon, great news, you lose too! Light Metal is probably the worst of the two though, mostly because they don't get the aforementioned buff to Heavy Slam, and all of its users just have better abilities anyhow. Heck, this ability is literally useless for Metagross, since even with its weight cut in half, it still stays in the same damage tier for Low Kick. I mean, just listen to me, it's got me talking about Low Kick like this is a move you're actually concerned about getting hit by. How about some more terrible signature abilities? Yeah, you knew we had to talk about it eventually. Probably the second worst ability of all time, Slow Start. Belonging to a Pokemon whose stats would make any opponent tremble until you realize those attack and speed stats are almost permanently going to be halved. Because how on earth are you supposed to survive on the field for more than 5 turns? This ability basically forces Regigigas to run moves like Thunder Wave, Substitute, and Confuse Ray to just burn off time until it finally gets going. The problem is, when it does get going, it only has enough room left for one attacking move. Why couldn't it just be 3 turns, or only a 30% debuff? 50 seems a little extreme, no? What did Regigigas even do to deserve this? Even without this ability, it's still far from being the most broken Gen 4 Pokemon. And although this only applies in Gen 7, I found it extremely amusing that even if Regigigas attempts to use a special Z move, Slow Start will also cut its special attack in half for that 1 turn only. He literally can't get a W. And now we move on to the slightly better designed version of Regigigas, but still pretty bad. Archeops, who sports the Defeatist ability, cutting its attack and special attack in half when it's under 50% HP. To be fair, this one is kinda necessary because without it, Archeops is an absolute menace. I just really hope you enjoy going back to the Pokemon Center every 5 minutes. Next up is the signature ability of Golisopod, Emergency Exit, which forces the user to switch when they fall below 50% HP. It's definitely not the worst signature ability since it allows Golisopod to get some extra mileage out of its former signature move First Impression, making it a pretty decent revenge killer, but the problem for it in competitive singles is that Stealth Rock is way too common and it ultimately leads to Golisopod getting its HP worn down more than anything. It also means you can completely forget about trying to set up a Swords Dance since you won't be staying in long enough to take advantage of it. And in the main story, it just makes Golisopod annoying to use. It's hard to formulate a strategy when you're not even sure if you'll be able to land a hit before switching. Next, we have abilities that have no effects at all in battle. Illuminate, which raises the chance of you encountering wild Pokemon, good for shiny hunting, but not much else. Ball Fetch, Yamper's ability that lets you get your first failed Pokeball back. And Honey Gather, which has a random chance of picking up a honey after the battle is over. Jeez, even Pickup is better than that! At least you have a chance of picking up rare candies or bottle caps at higher levels. And in Sword and Shield, honey holds no purpose other than being sold at a low price. And of course, what better to end things off with than with the worst ability of all time, Truant. Like Slow Start and Defeatist, it originally served to nerf Slacking, a Pokemon whose stats are just way too high, especially for a Pokemon that you can get as early as level 36. With a base stat total of 670 which ties Kyogre and Groudon, it kinda needed this. What I don't understand is slapping it on Durant 2 gens later. Maybe it's because this Pokemon lives in massive colonies so it can afford to slack off every once in a while, but come on man, lore aside, this Pokemon was already bad enough without Truant. It's a hidden ability too, it just feels like a joke gone too far at this point. The only benefit this ability has is if you somehow manage to pass it off to your foe, which more often than not just requires more setup and luck than it's really worth. Well, I'd love to talk more, but I have to get to my local GameStop tonight for the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet midnight launch, so, maybe I'll see you there? Probably not, but hey, whatever. But of course, I'm not gonna leave without saying thank you to the channel members. Thank you guys so very much for your continued support, and I'll see you guys next time.